Welcome all to this award ceremony, and I hope I could have my slides up, please. Thank you. So we're going to have a little a ceremony of the ISMRM Awards. So I hope you'll listen carefully and applaud and congratulate our new awardees as soon as they come up. So we have 4 things to go. We have the top cited papers in MRM and Journal of Magnetic Resonance in Medicine, GMRI, and we have the Junior Fellows, the Senior Fellows, and the Gold Medalist, as well as the Distinguished Medalist, which goes under the Goldies. So we start with the top 5 cited papers from 2016 in magnetic resonance in medicine, and we go backwards. So we have safety technique and pheromoxial administration for MRI with a group of people with Bashir as being the last author. I'm just going to read the titles because we are not going to go through every single name, but take a good look and praise them for what the work they have done. Second is signal-to-noise ratio and MR tissue parameters in human brain, imaging at 3.7 and 9.4 Tesla using current recovery coil average, and it's Klaus Schäfer as the last author. Then we have the trouble with quality filtering based on relative Kramer-Ray lower bounds. This is a single author, it's a Roland Kreis, and that was third up. Second up was simulus multi-slice SMRS imaging techniques, and it was the Benedict Poser as last author, and Dave Norris was the corresponding author on this one. And then the most cited paper 2016 was XD GRASP, Gold Angle Radial MRI with reconstruction of extra motion state dimensions using compressed sensing, and that's with Ricardo Utsatsu as the last author. So, a big applaud to the top 5 papers of MRM. Now we're going to do the top 5 cited papers in GMRI, and this is also from 2016. So we have diffusion-weighted imaging outside the brain, consensus statement from the ISMRM sponsor workshop, and here you could see we have a long list of prominent lecturers and leaders in our society that did this paper together. The next one is characterization of breast masses as benign or malignant at a 3.0 T MRI with whole lesion histogram analysis of the apparent diffusion coefficient. And that was the Zhang Zhu, the final author, the last author. We have intratumoral participation and texture analysis of dynamic contrast enhanced DCE MRI identifiers relevant tumor subregions to predict pathological response of breast cancer to neuroadjuvant chemotherapy with Vivian Lee as last author. And then we have applying amide proton transfer weighted MRI to distinguish pseudoprogression from true progression in malignant gliomas, and that comes from our Lauterbur lecture speaker from yesterday and his group, Peter van der Zijl, with Zhang Zhu as last author. And then we have the final atomatic analysis of the knee articular cartilage T1P relaxation time using voxel-based relaxometry, and that was with Shamila Majidar as the last author. So these were the 5 top GMRI cited papers of 2016, and as we can see overall, it's a quite broad range of topics. Leaving our great journals, we're now going into the award of the ISMRM Junior Fellows. This year we have 16 Junior Fellows. We have 6 females and 10 males, and they're coming from 8 different countries. And they are, and now I will try, and I now will start by apologizing. I've already done this to the recipients, is that I am a little bit bad with names, so the way I'm saying the name might not be fully correct, so you have to excuse me for that. I will do my best. So we will start with Arvind Arani. The next person to as a junior fellow was Jessica Bastiansen. Unfortunately, she was not able to attend as she had been recently a mother and needed to stay back home in Switzerland, but I think we give her an applause anyway. The third junior fellow is Timothy Bray from London. And then we have Essie Rekan from the medical center in Leiden as well. I think she is also working in Dallas. Stephanie Hectors, and she's a junior fellow coming from New York. Jana Hutter, coming from King's College in London. Ivan Yambur, coming from Turkey in Finland. We had Yuan Zhang, coming from Case Western in Cleveland. We have Dong-Wan Leigh, coming from Seoul. And we have Alex Sisi Leong, coming from Hong Kong. And we have Jian Liu, coming from Bethesda in the United States. And then we have Jia-Yun Ma, and I think he will be represented and accepted by Jingdu as Dr. Ma has recently back surgery and was not allowed to travel either. But a big applause. And then we have Minju Zhuangjiang. Me and names, sorry, Philadelphia. They have to beat me afterwards. Alan Sheffert from New York. And then we have Esther Warner, coming from Rotterdam, Netherlands. And we have Shuayang Shang, coming from Berkeley. So here we have the ISMRM Junior Fellows of 2019. Give them a big hold. Make sure that everybody can be. And then all of you take the opportunity when you see our young junior fellows to congratulate them in person. They well deserve that. And also, I would like now to remind you that the Junior Fellow Symposium on Wednesday at 1:30 in room 710A, MR from a Global Perspective, the Unrepresented Parts of the MR Spectrum, I think this will be a very interesting and nice session and symposium, and I really encourage you all to go and listen to what our young junior fellows have come up with. A really interesting program. We're now moving on to the ISMRM Senior Fellows. So these are given in honor of our colleagues for significant and substantial contribution to research in a field within the society's purposes. So the first person to line up is Adam Anderson, who is honored for his contribution to diffusion MR pulse sequence methods, data analysis, validations in animal models, and application in system in neuroscience. Our next senior fellow is Professor Frederic from the University Medical Center in Amsterdam and University College in London. He's honored for his contribution in the field of white matter diseases and dementia by performing histopathological correlation, developing visual rating scales and diagnostic criteria, and to identify MR biomarkers that can predict diseases, progression, and monitor treatment response, especially in multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's diseases. The next ISMRM Senior Fellow will be Peter Caravan, and he's honored for his work in the chemistry, biophysics application of molecular imaging probes and contrast agents. Now we come to the first female senior fellow, Mara Janse. And Mara is honored for her contribution in quantitative MRI of the brain and its translation into clinical applications. Next female senior fellow is Patricia Ellen Grant from the Boston Children's Hospital. She's honored for her collaborative work in the development and translational of novel imaging and imaging analysis strategies to study the placenta, fetus, neonate, and infants. Scott Hinks from General Healthcare is honored for his long-standing work in MR research and development with a main focus on MR systems physics, pulse sequences, and reconstruction, with special attention to eddy currents, early FCS developments, EPI, and imaging artifacts. John Hoston from Mayo Clinic is honored for his work in investigating clinical application of MR angiography, brain MR elastography, and the clinical evaluation of high-performance compact 3T head scanners. Jennifer Keegan from Royal Brompton Hospital is honored for her contribution in cardiovascular MR imaging focused on respiratory motion correction techniques, coronary artery flow, and high-resolution late gadolinium enhancement imaging. I don't like that. Peter Kelman from National Institute of Health is honored for his work in the field of signal processing and analysis and for development improved methods for cardiac imaging and tissue characterization. Ron Kinkis from Brigham and Women's Hospital is honored for his contribution in the field of MR imaging-guided interventions and medical imaging computering with open source software and image visualization, analysis, and surgical navigation. Unfortunately, Professor Kinkis could not be here today, but his award is accepted by Professor Claire Tempany. Don Yu Ko from Royal Medicine Hospital is honored for his work in development clinical body diffusion weighted MRI and oncology imaging. Kenneth Kwong from Massachusetts General Hospital is honored for his contribution in diffusion and for early visualization of visible cortex activation using fMRI and T1 weighted perfusion contrast. Klaus Nicolai from Eindhoven University of Technology, who had left us last year, is honored for his contribution to the advancement of MRI and MRS technology and in its application in the study of tissue structure, function, metabolism, and metabolic disorder, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. His award is accepted by Julie Nelson. Perry Rainshaw from Salt Lake City Veterans Affairs Medical Center is honored for his contribution in magnetization resonance methods, particularly MRS, and to better diagnose and treat psychiatric illnesses. It seems that Professor Rainshaw had another important meeting to go to, so hopefully he will get his awards given by somebody later, okay? but we give him a warm applause anyway. The next up is Amita Shukla Dev from Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. She's honored for her contribution in developing and standardized clinical relevant quantitative imaging and biomarkers in the field of prostate and head and neck. Greg Stanitz from Sunbrook Research Institute at the University of Toronto is honored for his work on quantitative relaxation, magnetization, transfer, and diffusion to understand the mechanism of MRI contrast in healthy and pathological tissue. Erdwin van Beek from University of Edinburgh is honored for his contribution in the field of pulmonary and cardiovascular imaging. Kei Yamada from Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine is honored for his contribution in the field of diffusion and perfusion MRI in the brain. So now we give a big salute and a hail to our new 2019 ISMRM Senior Fellows. They're well worthy to congratulate. And as I said previously, if you see them in person, don't hesitate to go up and congratulate them. They're well worthy for the work they do and what they have done for the ISMRM in the past. So now we come into the Distinguished Medal and the Gold Medalist. And the ISMRM Distinguished Medal is honored for distinguished contribution, support, mentorship, and work for our society. This lady is amazing. She has been a little bit of a mentor for me over the years that I've been in ISMRM. She was born in Uganda, traveled around with her family a little bit, as you can see, and also was a hard worker already then, carrying around her little stroller. But she also went to school, and you can see her sitting here with her sister when they have ready to go to the primary school one day, and the little sister in the background was not in school yet, but she was already dressed as ready to become a nurse. Our distinguished medalist moved to UK at the age of 10, and where she attended public school and was the first female at her school to enter the Cambridge, even though she had been told by the headmaster that no women goes to Cambridge. So she was, by her physics professor or teacher, encouraged to apply, and she got into Cambridge, and I think after that several females from her school at the time followed her. She's happily married to a very supportive and lifelong friend, her husband Roland, and she's a mother of 3 children, and despite that she has continuously to work full-time during her career and been a very serious researcher, educator, mentor, and she's very respected for her mentorship and her guidance of her students, which you could see 3 of them here up to the right. And as you notice, one of them was our junior fellow awardee, Team Bray. So in contribution for this work, as you all know, it's going to be, I have to go do like this. I have to check something. I'm a little bit confused here. Okay, so we go back. So I'm sorry about that. So the contributions that Margaret have done, as you can see, is tremendous support and work within the society itself as member of the board of trustee, member of the executive committee, being our secretary for several years. She had been the AMPC program chair, the same as John Port is now. And she have also been mentor in several different committees, a member and mentoring several different committees. And she's the chair of the Women's Forum, or the Women in ISMRM. She's contributed by her mentorship, by her educated activities, but also for doing quite significant research within the diseases of joint and bone. Her impact on the society is, of course, on what she have done, is this extraordinary service to the ISMRM. She has over 250 publications, and she is a strong advocate and for mentorship and for taking care and promote women in the society, not only in the ISMRM, but actually women in the research environment. And therefore, it's my greatest pleasure and honor to welcome up on the stage the Distinguished Medal to Professor Margaret Hall-Craggs in honor for her distinguished service, unconditional contribution in education, research achievements, her hard work and guidance, mentorship of young students, postdocs, junior colleagues within the ISMRM, including me. Margaret, please.
I've been told I can say a few words. So firstly, I'd like to say this is a huge honor, and I'm absolutely thrilled to get this medal. I am really, really thrilled. This is actually my Oscar moment, so, you know, I can do Gwyneth Paltrow and, you know. And I can also say thank you to some people. So I want to thank lots of extraordinary people that I've worked with within ISMRM. It's been wonderful being part of this society. And I've met and worked with some really, truly extraordinary people. So I want to thank them. And in particular, I want to thank Vivian Lee, who gave me the opportunity to be the chair of the MPC. And also, I want to thank Mark Griswold, if he's here, because we've done all sorts of harebrained, crazy things together, you know. And most of them you won't have heard about, thank God. Anyway, so I want to thank people in the ISMRM. I want to thank the people in central office and Roberta, who actually make much of what we want to happen. So thank you, Roberta. Thank you, central office. And then, of course, there's my colleagues at UCH and UCL, and several of them here. So hi, people. Thank you for coming. Particular thanks to Shonette, whose father's not very well, and we wish him well. And then finally, I want to thank my green team. So my green team are my family. So I have Roland, Elspeth, Ivor, and Duncan. And Ivor said, can I give him a particular shout, because he's the favourite. But thank you, everyone. And lastly, thank you to Pia for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to everyone in the ISMRM. Without you, we wouldn't have a society. Without you, we wouldn't have MR education and science. So thank you very much. And it's been lovely being here.
So the ISMRM Gold Medals is supposed to be given in honor for pioneering scientific contributions to magnetic resonance in medicine and biology. I think we should look at that in a little bit broader perspective, in the sense that it's not necessarily only scientific contributions. You could contribute in other ways significantly to the society, as we can see. So, The first gold medalist is a lady, a woman, who was a Rhodes Scholar, ready for travel already early. And now you can look at the photo carefully and see if we could find where we have Vivien. Huh? Well, it's going to be something that you have to work on. Vivien is also a mother that never stopped her from coming to ISMRM. She took the baby with her. And I would say the past 10 years, or something so, Vivien has become a very strong advocate and leader in the field of healthcare solutions to be beneficial for patients at low cost, and to put radiology as a part of this really important healthcare and the healthcare system and how we can work. And there comes, of course, MR in as well. So, Professor Vivian Lee's scientific contributions, she have contributed with novel methods for measuring kidney function and diagnosis renal diseases non-invasively. She has worked with non-contrast enhanced MR angiographic methods for imaging in vascular diseases, and she has dedicated her time to improve health and healthcare with innovations that would enable higher quality at lower cost and higher patient satisfaction. And as you could see on her impact on the science, she has more than 180 publications, and she has been mentor for numerous students and fellows. And of course, her work in the healthcare and how to reorganize and to restructure healthcare is extremely important and well worthy. So please welcome me up on the stage, Professor Vivian Lee, who's getting the medal for her contribution to novel methods for measuring kidney function and for her work in vascular disease, and that she has this drive for the MR value and for the better health care to the people around us.
All right, well, thank you so much, Pia, and thank you to the awards committee. I wrote down a few remarks. I left volumes 2, 3, and 4 at home. You'll be glad to hear. You know, in the course of our hectic lives, there aren't very many opportunities for us to take a moment to reflect on the journey so far and on the future, and Pia's call about the gold medal really gave me the chance to do that. In the earliest part of my career, as I was transitioning from being a surgical intern to being a radiology resident, it was really the MRI teams at Duke and at Stanford who really helped me find my calling. In particular, Dwight Nishimura's case-based lecture at Stanford was mind-blowing for me, and it made me want to be a MR radiologist. It made me want to do MRI and to teach MRI. And it even inspired me to write my own book on MR physics and cardiovascular applications, which I have to say my husband suggested that I should have called it Harry Potter and the Physics of MRI. He said that would have maybe boosted sales just a little bit. As a radiologist at NYU, I was given the opportunity by another MR radiologist and former gold medal winner Bob Grossman to help lead the research enterprise there, and that gave me an opportunity to really think about MRI in the context of really advancing our understanding of basic science and improving diagnosis and care. Then when I was given the chance to go to Utah to be the dean and CEO there, again, I was welcomed by a wonderful MRI community with Dennis Parker and team there. And as the CEO of that health system, I started thinking about MRI a little bit maybe more critically, wondering about how we could show that we were really driving value in healthcare with MRI, really improving outcomes cost effectively. And a lot of that work there actually has led me to focus on another book on healthcare that I'm working on now. And then now I've come back actually to my engineering roots and back to Boston and welcomed again by the MR community there. the folks at the MGH. And although my work at Verily and in Alphabet, where I just joined a year ago, isn't really just on imaging, you'll understand how delighted I was that the first group chat that I was invited to join at Google was the case-based group. So we are everywhere, in case you're wondering. Along the way, this society has been a second professional family for me. And as you heard from Margaret, many of us in this room have spent many, many hours together really thinking about the society and enjoying the pleasure of the company of everyone in this room. And all of you have shaped our thinking about science, and the friendships here have been so profoundly meaningful to each and every one of us here. So I just want to close with a thought about the future. I have two quotes from one of my favorite people from Utah, Mario Capecchi. Mario won the Nobel Prize for transgenic mice, and he used to say, "The difficult we do right away, the impossible takes a little longer." And the corollary for that was, it takes the same amount of effort to work on little questions as it does to work on big questions, so why not work on big questions? And so that's how I hope to spend my future. So thank you all very, very much for this honor, and thank you for the pleasure of your company over all these years. Thank you.
Our next gold medalist is, as you can see, a lady that have been visiting ISMRM very frequently from many years early. She have also been in Cambridge. I assume this is with her husband. I don't know, but I assume so. If I'm wrong, and then I have to be excused. And she also, of course, takes the chance to be together with her students at different workshops, meetings. So somebody who really has ISMRM to her heart. The contributions for our next gold medalist, Professor Viola, is that she has been using MRI and MRS in identifying and advancing our understanding of the aberrant choline metabolism that exists in many cancers, in most cancers. And she has significantly advanced our understanding of the role of tumor microenvironment on cancer invasion and metastasis. She is very highly cited and has a high index factor. She has published more than 150 papers, and she has dedicated, mentored to more than 20 postdoc fellows. And she has received several awards, among those the gold medal from the World Molecular Imaging Society in 2017. So please welcome on the stage Professor Viola for her contributing using MRI and MRS in the identifying and advancing our understanding of the aberrant choline metabolism that exists in many cancers, and the significant advancing our understanding of the role of the tumor microenvironment on cancer invasion and metastasis.
So thank you, Pia, and the awards committee for this wonderful recognition. And it's all the more special because I'm in such great company with the remarkable achievements of my co-awardees. So my journey to this award would not be possible without the efforts of some exceptional individuals who worked alongside of me. And I would like to especially acknowledge and thank my fellows, past and current, the really fantastic faculty that I've had the privilege to work with, and my mentors. And in my 2 minutes, of course, it's impossible to cover all these individuals, but I would especially like to mention Dmitry Artemov, Christine Glund, Balaji Krishnamachari, and then, of course, Bob Gillies, not my husband, but my mentor in the picture. Actually, I'm married to Johns Hopkins. So Joe Ackerman, John Griffiths, and of course Jerry Glickson, who recruited me to Johns Hopkins all these years ago. So the ISMRM, as you see from my blue ribbon, it's been a constant force in my scientific career. And these meetings have been just such a source of inspiration, ideas, and lasting friendships. And so thank you very much again for this wonderful award. Thank you.
Our last gold medalist is a woman that deserves it so well, Sarah Nelson. She was a pioneer in imaging science and an extraordinary leader, mentor, inventor, and scholar who shared her wisdom and knowledge generously with her colleagues, her students, and people around. I am very happy, I'm very sad knowing that Sarah left us only a little bit over a month ago. But I could say that I'm extremely happy and honored that I had the opportunity to talk to Sarah in person and giving her the notice that she had been awarded the gold medal. And I could let you know, I could say that Sarah was extremely happy and very honored over this award. And even though due to her illness, she felt that she most likely would not be able to attend today, she had made sure that there would be somebody here to accept this award on her behalf. So the gold medal goes for Sarah's scientific contributions in many ways. She was a pioneer in magnetic resonance spectroscopy, in the development of the methodology of the three-dimensional MRI imaging and spectral processing. She was also a pioneer in the development of hyperpolarized C13 MRI, and for this contribution, she received the gold medal from the World Molecular Imaging Congress back in 2014. Sarah was also a very highly cited person. She had published over 270 papers. She had a number of awards, but most importantly, I think, was her generosity, her mentor for so many students and junior faculty, and the way that she always supported females in the MRI. And as I've had understood, more than half of her students have been women. And she was an exceptional role model for female leadership. So the 2019 gold medal to Professor Sarah Nelson goes for her pioneering contributions for metabolic imaging, particularly in magnetic resonance spectroscopy, hyperpolarized 13C imaging in neuro-oncology, and for her generous support and dedication for students and fellow colleagues around the world. And in the award will be accepted by Jamie Lupo and Zhang Liu. These two ladies on stage were the two persons Sarah wanted to be here. So please.
Thank you, Pia, and the awards committee. It is both with sadness and great honor that we accept the gold medal on behalf of Sarah Nelson and her family who could not join us here today, to celebrate the myriad of her life achievements that she attained and will be remembered for years to come. Words cannot begin to describe just how honored we are that her accomplishments have been recognized by such a renowned community and to be chosen to accept this award on her behalf. Sarah was notified about the gold medal just before embarking down the path of chemotherapy for pancreatic cancer. For those of you familiar with Sarah's selfless nature, it was not surprising that when she knew she wouldn't be able to fly to Montreal to accept it in person, she tried to politely decline so that the society could give it to someone else instead. When informed that this was not an option, she asked if Vivian and I could accept the award on her behalf and expressed to you just how honored she felt to have received it. While planning what to say today, as I often do for many decisions, I try to think of what Sarah would do or say if she were here. Not to trivialize the accomplishments described by Pia, but if Sarah were still with us, she would attribute her successes to her colleagues and friends in science, the endless support of her family, those she mentored on research projects, and the patients who were committed to returning month after month for their scans, because Sarah understood the importance of and truly believed in team science. Not only was she a strong proponent of open source tools and the dissemination of knowledge freely, she knew when to take the back seat and let others take more of the credit, because ultimately we were all a team who can be successful for decades when each member is empowered to have their chance to shine. This philosophy and the supportive, nurturing environment that she fostered in her group and amongst colleagues proved to be successful time and time again.
This selflessness and genuine collaborative spirit was not only the driving force behind her accomplished research career, but resulted in a dedication to mentoring that allowed her to touch the life of so many. Of the countless students, postdoc researchers, staff, and junior faculty that Sarah had graciously mentored over the years, Jenny and I have been fortunate to reap the benefits the longest. Starting out as a graduate student in her lab, and now as collaborating faculty. During this time, we were able to witness her greatness in the many stages of both her career and our own. We feel so fortunate to have experienced firsthand such exceptional mentorship, watching her evolve over the years as a scientist, forging her way through artful negotiations, leadership positions, and creating a program, division, and finally Department of Bioengineering at UCSF, of which she was the first chair. All these were never sacrificing the precious gifts of her time and attention to those she mentored. The role model she had become to so many of us, struggling to find our way in science while balancing lives of our own families, was more inspirational than she was aware. When asked how she wanted to be remembered in 100 years, in a recent interview, she responded, "I would like to be remembered as being a good person, that's all. Somebody who cares about others." I think the mentorship of students is very, very important. In remembering Sarah, we will strive to work together to improve the health of patients she cares so much for, and continue to pause and think, what would Sarah do when faced with a challenge? Research-wise, this translates to developing tools to make MR spectroscopy imaging something as routinely performed as T1 weighted imaging on patients with cancer and neurologic disease. We have no doubt that Sarah will live on in all of us who embody her philosophy, fostering the selfless goals of mentoring and nurturing young talent, reminding us of the right path, drawing us from error, and remembering our humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So here you have these 2019 ISMRM gold medals, and we give them a warm applause. So just remember our strategic goals of this society: expanding vision, expanding mind, and improving life through MR, which I think we now have seen through this award that we truly do. And then also start thinking now for the next year's awards So be open-minded, be generous with yourself to think of people, of colleagues that you think are worthy to be a junior, a senior, a distinguished medalist, or a golden medalist. And so submit your nominations as soon as possible so we can start looking into the future. And reflect who you are and keep diversity and inclusiveness in mind when you're looking at the future nominees. And with this, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention and hail our awardees. And after this, now, thank you. I will also announce that the next session now will be a plenary section on disruptors. And past President Dan Sodikerson is nodding nicely, knowing that I'm doing the right thing. So I will ask them up on the podium to take over, and I will step down. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, congratulations and sincere thanks once again to all of our awardees who have, of course, disrupted our field in the course of their remarkable achievements. So now we'd like to welcome all of you to this year's ISMRM plenary session on disruptors. As you heard, I'm Dan Sodikerson, and I'll take just 5 minutes, if you'll allow me, to introduce the session, which was conceived by members of your annual meeting program committee, including our moderators, Elna Marie Larson and Jin Yu, along with Kei Yamada and me. So, why, you might ask, do we need a session on disruptors? To quote the New York Times bestseller shown here, our iceberg is melting. In other words, our field of MR and, in fact, the larger world around us is now subject to a remarkable combination of disruptive forces and disruptive innovations. In this session, we'd like to begin to take stock of at least a few of those changes. So there are various ways to approach a study of disruption, including the historical approach and what also might be called the futurist approach. Those of you who are fans of Yuval Noah Harari know that he's taken both of these approaches also in best-selling books. So let me take a page for a moment from his books and review with you a brief history of disruption to lay the groundwork for the three futurists who will follow in this session. I'll try to use the field of communications as an illustrative example. So come with me, if you would, on a journey back through time to the beginnings of human communications. In the beginning, it was just us, humans, sitting and talking together. Over time, we developed methods for archival information storage beyond our own minds and voices. And eventually, as our tool-building capabilities advanced, we developed machines to help us store and communicate information more broadly and more rapidly. When we finally mastered the electron, of course, these machines became electronic, like the telegraph shown here. And the telegraph, of course, quickly gave way to the telephone, and Alexander Graham Bell sowed the seeds for a company explicitly devoted to communications. For those who are interested in the history of disruptive innovation, I highly recommend this book called The Idea Factory, which catalogs through personal stories the way in which AT&T's Bell Laboratories essentially invented its own demise. How? By developing the transistor and seeding all of modern microelectronics, which allowed other companies like IBM to convert clunky, cumbersome computers like you see here on your left into the small, indispensable devices like the personal computers on the right. But IBM, too, would face challenges that required a dramatic turnaround, as documented in this book and other areas. And of course, IBM wasn't alone. Hewlett-Packard, as well, famously had to retool or die in the face of disruptive forces. So what disruptive forces? Well, these ones. Software, which, of course, began literally changing the world, and which also enabled these miniature devices, which have made their way into nearly every home and nearly every life, leaving us more or less where we are today with software, with a world increasingly connected by the internet and its cloud-based manifestations. Okay, so for the purposes of discussion, let me oversimplify all the stages I just laid out for you into just 4. The impetus began with humans, was handed over to machines, until the information handled by these machines became more and more of a motive force in its own right, enabling worldwide coordination on unprecedented scales. Now, of course, you may be wondering what this has to do with imaging, so let's move a little closer now to the field of astronomy, which is, of course, the exploration of outer space. Our questing eyes were replaced and supplemented by machines that helped us see further. The information provided by these machines became more and more abstracted in the form of digital astronomy, until you could have something like the Event Horizon Telescope, which obviously got a lot of news recently with its black hole visualization, which essentially is a telescope the size of the Earth itself, coordinating information from all around our world. Okay, so that's outer space. What about inner space? As we all know, MRI and biomedical imaging more broadly is about that exploration. We've supplemented simple inspection with our eyes with, of course, the marvelous machines that so many of us here devote our lives to. We've also seen, in recent times, tasks originally performed in hardware more and more being accomplished by software, and I would argue that we're solidly in the phase of the information phase of disruption. So the big question we want to explore in this plenary is what's coming next in our field and in the world around us. How will we need to prepare ourselves to adapt and ultimately to continue to lead? We are privileged to have 3 remarkable guides in framing some early answers to these questions. Our first distinguished seer is Andrew Webb, a new member of your ISMRM Board of Trustees and a noted innovator in many areas, including the realm of MR hardware, who will tell us about disruptors to the way we gather data, envisioning what our machines and the data they acquire might look like in the not-too-distant future. Next, the extraordinary and inimitable Mark Griswold, your ISMRM Gold Medalist and former program chair, and a well-known disruptive innovator who, with diverse and talented colleagues, brought you tools like Grappa or MR fingerprinting, will tell us about disruptors to the way we visualize data, giving us a peek into the augmented realities he envisions with new partners like Microsoft. Finally, we're privileged to hear from the wise and formidable Hedy Hrysak, another ISMRM Gold Medalist, recent RSNA president, and worldwide thought leader in the field of radiology, about disruptors to the way we interpret data. She'll school us in how we should think about the potential role and added value of AI, the future of radiologic workflow, and the imaging value proposition. So I think that's more than enough from me now, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Webb to the podium to get the disruption started. Andy.
I don't think I've ever been described as a distinguished seer before. So, in thinking about this talk, to start off with, to put this in the framework, I think, of the way that we gather data just on an everyday basis. So as my students and colleagues know, I'm one of the most useful Twitter users in our group. You know, this is the thing that we see every second. Things are being twittered around from the ISMRM. I just joined several hours ago, and actually I've already got number 1. Right, my first follower is this distinguished professor of neuroradiology, Marion Smits, who's also going to be the next president of ISMRMB. So off to a good start here. And I think if we look at the way we gather data, then with Twitter, you know, what I like about Twitter is the fact that it effectively forces people to shut up after a certain amount of time. You know, that you can't endlessly go on writing or talking or anything like that. So in the spirit of Twitter, I want to look at a little bit historically from how we gather data, how did we gather data, how do we gather data, how could we gather data, how should we, and how will we. I think that gives me a few characters left. So let me try and expand on some of those issues. So how could we and how should we? I think to concentrate on the fact that as we develop new sequences and as we develop new hardware, these two things are completely interlinked. And even though conferences such as this one, we have to admit, sort of separate these sessions, it's an important factor in terms of disruption that these two things go hand in hand. And in terms of how will we, as I said, I'll talk a little historically, but that's fairly boring. I want to talk more about future disruptors. So what are we going to do in the future? And that nowadays, you can be completely wrong. It doesn't really matter that there's going to be a few hundred people here still awake in 15 minutes and the whole thing is being videoed. Nowadays, you can pretty much have plausible deniability of anything. And then I want to look at two different factors, not just how do we acquire data or how will we acquire data, but who is going to acquire the data, and then for whom are the data going to be acquired. So the original disruptors, of course, the most famous image that's come up, shown at every single conference from one of the two geniuses of MRI. I thought I'd show you a couple of slides you perhaps haven't seen. There's a little bit of a myth that a genius comes along, has an idea over dinner, goes back to the lab, acquires the data, writes the paper, sends the paper in, it gets rejected by an idiot, they send it back in again, and the thing gets published. That this sort of concept that genius is in fact 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration was in this case somewhat circumvented. And I want to show you a couple of data sets, the original data sets that came from the lab, and to point out here. So first data sets, 10th of October 1971. Again, you can see this phenomenon of graph paper and an ink pen and things that most of you have never seen before. So 10th of October 1971. Here's the next data set, 4th of October 1972. So this is more than a single evening's experiment, right? This is already quite a long time. If we go here, this is 1973, and also if you can see this up here, start experiment at 12:58 a.m., right? 1 o'clock in the morning. So this is not just somebody going back to their lab and twiddling a couple of knobs and getting out a Nature paper. There's a lot of work that goes into this. The other thing that I think is kind of important for all of us to remember that we do have some link to geniuses is if we look over here, we also see that people spill coffee on arguably some of their best data sets over here. And also being male, they sort of actively hope that diffusion is going to clean it up somehow. So what I think is fascinating, and I'll come to this theme a little bit as we go through, is the way that why MR is such an active field in terms of disruption is the fact you can think about fundamental phenomena in very, very different ways. And so on the other side of the pond, in England, we have a group that is thinking of MR not from a tomographic point of view, but from a diffraction point of view. In other words, they're taking inspiration from the early work here done in terms of DNA structure determination, right, where you have basically the helix of DNA, which is giving you a certain pattern, an X-ray diffraction pattern, and then experts and leaders in this field, Rosalind Franklin being the most eminent here, are able to tell something about the structure from that. And then we look at MR diffraction. Of course, if we put a gradient on after a pulse, we induce in the sample a helical structure in terms of the spatial phase. Now, of course, the dimensions of that helical structure that you've induced are far, far greater in MR than they are in the natural helix of DNA. But exactly the same principle holds. And if we look at MR diffraction and we look at optical diffraction, we see exactly the same equations here. So we have a completely different way of thinking about getting spatial information into the signal. And if you look at the original data here, so I'm just reproducing the images here, they took 5 layers, they put on a gradient, they acquired their diffraction data over here. And if we come in and we do a cosine Fourier transform, then we actually end up with a spatial projection of our data over here. And of course, the fact here, this rings a bell immediately, right? Even in these early days, this is a direct analogy of the case-based formalism that we use almost uniformly today. Okay? And of course, this person for these things got the ultimate scientific accolade, as we all know, which is essentially to have a beer named after you, and in this case, served as it should be at room temperature, and actually with some taste, best British bitter. So during the 80s then, where are we? We're basically anatomical imaging. We're looking at single-channel transmit and receive systems, and incredibly, as it now seems, we seem to think we actually needed to acquire the whole of K-space. In terms of anatomical imaging then, what changed, of course, and broadened things was the entire area of functional imaging. I'm not going to go into this. There's been very, very many plenary talks over the years on this. But essentially the ability to look at things like the bold effect over here. And again, if we look at the initial images that were acquired, and we now look at what's possible over here in terms of ocular dominance columns, in terms of extremely high-resolution laminar fMRI from the group of Natalia Petridou, and if we also look at then the anatomical connectivity in terms of what Peter showed some yesterday of diffusion tensor imaging, we see that these techniques, the only way that we can make these techniques work is by having the equivalent sequence development and the equivalent hardware development. And of course, the second really disruptive technology that came along was the Nmr Phased Array. And essentially, this is a paper that, as a coil engineer, I'll admit, nothing's really changed over the last 30 years, right? We've published a lot of papers on coils, but this contains everything. This is a one-dimensional array. This is two-dimensional array. This is looking at the optimal overlap. This is looking at preamp decoupling. This is looking at how you get your signal and you combine your signal. And it's almost impossible now for us to think about not having arrays in everything we do, either from research or a clinical point of view. It's interesting that the group really came in from the point of view of just increasing signal to noise, so using the higher sensitivity of smaller coils over just having one larger coil. And then, of course, the next disruption we get into is parallel imaging, a few people not too far away from here who was obviously involved in this. And rather than just looking at the signal to noise increase, what they realized is that as you have spatial information within these coil arrays, this means you don't have to use all of your gradient encoding to acquire the whole of space. In other words, you can somewhat relax your k-space sampling. And of course, this comes in the two most commonly used techniques over here, one in the image domain, one in the k-space domain. But one thing I want to say about this, when this came out, remember at the ISMRM, this was a very controversial topic when it was first presented. And I want to talk about Arthur C. Clarke, who was an English science fiction writer and a scientist. He wrote most famously 2001, The Space Odyssey, that was turned into the famous Stanley Kubrick film. But he had a certain number of rules for scientists. And his first rule goes like this. When distinguished but elderly scientists say that something's possible, they're probably right. And you can imagine the corollary. When they say it's probably impossible, then they're very probably wrong. And this is what happened at ISMRM. You know, these young guys were coming out parallel imaging, and there were several ISMRM, either past or future gold members, who came up and stood in front of them and said, "You're wrong. It doesn't work. You're wrong." So something to remember, I think, during this conference. This has sort of opened Pandora's box, right? Suddenly, for the first time, we're thinking about, you don't actually have to acquire the whole of k-space. Bad things don't happen, right? We're somewhat terrified of not fully sampling. But I think the big thing, and the last one that I want to look at historically in terms of disruptors, is compressive sensing. Because essentially, the idea was that you went away from this classic sampling, whether that was with parallel imaging or without parallel imaging, where your number of samples effectively is related to the bandwidth of the signal. You went to this new sort of concept where the number of samples was actually related to the information content. And so if your information is sparse in some domain, maybe that's spatial temporal, then you don't have to sample as much. And here's the classic figure that many of you will recognize, that if we come in and we randomly undersample, and from the random undersampling, we do standard Fourier transformation over here, we still get something that looks like an image. I think the other big disruption, though, from this work was it really forced us, maybe for the first time, to start looking at non-Fourier-based reconstruction techniques. Because if we build sparsity into that reconstruction technique, then essentially we get very, very high-resolution images back from massively undersampled data. And again, this is something that now we start, I think in 5 years' time, we will have no idea what it is not to be using this kind of sparse sampling. And I'll invoke Arthur C. Clarke's third rule, slightly out of order, which says any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And a little bit, that's what I feel. And I don't care. I don't care that I don't fully understand compressed sensing. It's kind of nice just to have something out there that has a little bit of a mystery about it, but the people who actually do understand it, It's a rigorous thing. It works. So why is MRI such a rich area for disruption? So I want to do a 3-slide soliloquy here on why there's so many old people like me who are still stuck in MRI. Why do we keep with the field? So just imagine this. Where else can you go along to Tim Hortons and get a latte, and I'll explain in a second why, and put it in an MRI machine and say, you know what? I'm looking at a quantum mechanical system. I can manipulate a quantum mechanical system with a series of pulses and a series of gradients. And the thing about that system is that the relaxation times are long. So that means whatever I do with that system, it's going to last long enough that I can measure it. And sometimes we don't appreciate this. You go and talk to your particle physicist or go and talk to your laser spectroscopist, who also have these systems, who also have clever pulse sequences, but their signals die away in 3 picoseconds. So a lot of what we're able to do, a lot of this flexibility is related to the fact that we have a system with very, very long relaxation times. And so this means that you can literally go in, you can write down a sequence where you turn gradients on, you turn gradients off, you turn pulses on, you turn pulses off. You can sit in front of a spectrometer, and you can influence a quantum mechanical system straight away. Admittedly, if you actually happen to use a clinical scanner, your sequence is probably going to look a little bit more like this. Right? Many of you have seen this from Margaret Hamilton, who was one of the lead software writers on the Apollo program. So I realize that EPIC and IDEA don't exactly look like the sequences on the left. And just to say, here we go. Let's put on some pulses. Right? We'll put on 5 different pulses. We've got 5 different tip angles over here. After the second pulse already, we can use this, depending on our delays, depending on angles, we can suppress the signal from water, we can suppress fat. That's why I said the Tim Horton latte. We can store magnetization. We've got transverse magnetization. If we've got a coupled system, we've got double quantum, we've got 0 quantum coherence. Later on here, we form a spin echo. We've got Hahn echoes, we've got antiphase magnetization. If we flip over here, we've got stimulated echoes from the 3 pulses, secondary spin echoes, FIDs. You've got high signal, you've got what's called a dipolar echo. You've already encoded T1, T2, and T2 star relaxation here. You've stored your multiple quantum coherence, and if you're a physicist, you've actually created a 3-bit quantum computer. And you haven't even turned any gradients on. Right? If you turn gradients on, then we can crush magnetization here just with a single gradient. But actually, if you look at that, it's interesting. You don't automatically crush the gradients. In fact, if you look here, you actually, if you have a high signal intensity, you create a chaotic system as it comes back to thermal equilibrium. It's a really fascinating paper. It's utterly useless, but it's really fascinating. If you come here, you can then put bipolar gradients, and we know that we now encode diffusion, we encode velocity, we encode acceleration. And then if we put more gradients on, we have the choice. We can further encode those, or we can actually compensate for those. So we have an incredible platform for being able to do experiments on a quantum mechanical system, and I think that's why so many people are in this society, and despite what old guys say about there being nothing new, there's always something new at every conference. So what's going to happen in the future here? Well, some things are fairly obvious, I think. They're very important. Things like our magnet technology, which has been a little bit behind, I would say, in terms of development, is really making massive accelerations here. So we have cryogen-free magnets coming in. We have new magnet designs that are going to make both high-field and low-field magnets much more functional, and I think may also increase the accessibility, which is an issue I want to come back to. From an RF point of view, we're going to have wireless coils, we're going to have flexible coils. And sometimes an RF engineer is going to realize that when they do optimization and they publish it in MRM, the answer doesn't have to be 8 or 16 or 32 coils, right? It could be actually a different number, because most humans, including many engineers, we're not symmetric, right? And we're not infinitely divisible by 2. And we're going to go to homeopathic K-space coverage, right? Essentially, we're going to keep acquiring fewer and fewer and fewer data sets and be able to get all of our signal back again. And there's also this thing, right? You may have heard of this, called AI. And depending on who you talk to, AI is incredibly interesting. It's a radical technology coming in this decade, or it's incredibly boring and it's essentially a radiological dishwasher. And I was inspired by Peter Van Zyl, who said yesterday, one of the ways to progress is to look into something you don't normally do. So I was looking into the dishwasher literature, which you may not have done. And if you look at this, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of science involved in dishwashing, and there's a lot of common things with MRI, right? We have bulk water over here. We have field of views over here. We have missing data that needs to be put in here, although a couple of things, ejection and downfall, luckily we don't have equivalents of. So there's a lot of discussion on it. Some is going to be overhyped. Some of it is going to be underhyped, the sort of Luddite. So we have to avoid both of those extremes. And I think we'll see an excellent plenary lecture from Professor Arbel from McGill later in this week. It has a checkered history. Sometimes it works, working over here. You can see the FDA-approved app was launched in 2018. Sometimes it fails. Companies no longer work, or companies lose 62 million. So it is going to be difficult to implement, but I think the promise is definitely worth the effort. But AI, I've talked about as being used in essentially a very passive way in terms of analyzing data, etc. And we actually think that it should be used in a much more active way. And I want to challenge some of the things that will be talked about this week, which is everything going towards standardization, standardized clinical protocols, and in a sense, that really means you depersonalize medicine, that your protocol is set before the patient goes in, and you're not having anything that is adapted on that protocol. So what should you be standardizing? I don't care about your data acquisition parameters. What you care about is the diagnostic quality of the image that comes out, and that is the thing that should be standardized. And that means you need to put online, real-time changes to the way that you're acquiring data. So you imagine you're continuously acquiring data, you're evaluating it in real time, and then you make your decisions on whether you're going to spend that time acquiring more K-space. If you're doing diffusion, maybe you'll acquire more B factors. Maybe you need to signal average. Maybe some of your data is low signal to noise or motion corrupted. So we use this kind of online dynamic imaging to try and increase the diagnostic quality and to keep that equal along patients. In terms of hardware then, we're going to hybridize hardware. We see that things that if you read standard textbooks, you find your RF and your gradients, your magnet, they're all different chapters. We start to see everything coming together over here. We start to see RF and shim arrays being integrated into the same physical space, and that improves our ability to shim. We even see the idea that gradients don't have to be gradients. They can be like shim coils that can also be gradients as well. So we see a modularity here where we may increase the number of elements, but we make those elements individually more similar. We can even then start losing things like dynamic B0 shimming for parallel B1 transmit, right? Really cut across the borders over here. So who acquires the data? Down to 2 minutes. This is important. We've heard this a lot, and I'm still going to hammer on it. Look at the old photographs over here of the pioneers of MR. And then Fourier transform it, but not a regular Fourier transform it. Let's do a 2D forward chromosomal transform. And a chromosomal transform basically gets us into the fact that in the KXX, which engineers as the female chromosome, we're severely undersampled. And over the years, and I think PS showed some statistics yesterday, we're getting better, 25% to 35%, but it isn't enough. So let's keep going, let's not accept this, and let's keep encouraging and removing barriers where we see them. That's only half the story, and we haven't talked about this at all. In the US, in October, they have Nobel Prize, and it's also Black History Month. 900 Nobel laureates. Science, 0. Black. Enough said. Who are we going to acquire the data for? And I want to link that to what I just said here. 70% of the world's population has 0 access to MRI. There is no accessibility. Many countries have a single scanner, and some of the ways that we assuage our guilt on that is we donate medical equipment, 96% of which is broken and in storage because nobody knows how to use it and nobody knows how to fix it. I've got to mention paradigm shift somewhere, okay? But let's think about a paradigm shift. I'm not saying everybody has to give up their research project and jump into this. But as you go around, just think about some of the incredibly sophisticated techniques that you are developing, see how they might be applied to a different application here. So rather than taking very sophisticated hardware and very cheap signal processing, let's switch it around. Because we don't need that sophisticated hardware to make a difference in some of these areas, and the signal processing there is cheap. AI and other things can make incredible advances. This is a place where it can really make a difference. And we go from being able to do everything to being able to do single things from our MRI machine. We go from flexible sequences to being the MRCT, something that anybody can run and that is easy to fix. And we go to something that's sustainable, repairable, and modular. Can you make a system here? Some lads are building these for under 10,000 euros. The ISMRM is jumping into this, a great recent workshop. People like Clarissa Cooley then at MGH are coming up with new disruptive technology and also disruptive distribution. Open source is beginning to really gain traction. So is this naive? Absolutely. Good. This was independent of Pia's slide yesterday. Let's use this young lady as a role model. Final slide. Apologies for running over. Enjoy Montreal. Inspire a younger scientist. Hell, go and inspire an older scientist. And if you can't inspire them, annoy the hell out of them. And Clarke's second law, the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is just go a little bit past them. Don't stop before them, and then you can go back. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, for the inspiring talk. Now let's move to invite our second speaker, Dr. Mark Griswold. So Mark is a professor of Case Western Reserve University. And among all the exciting and cutting-edge technologies he has pioneered, he lately is partnering with Microsoft for the development of the augmented reality, which promises us to visualize the data in a new way. Let's welcome Mark.
I also have to just let everybody know that Andrew Webb is the reason that I do MRI. He was an inspiration to me when I was really young, so it's just amazing to be able to sit here and talk after him. Glad that we were able to coordinate outfits today. I also want to thank Margaret Hall-Craggs, too. I think it's so wonderful that she won this award, and she's been such a role model to me, just demonstrating passion for doing what's right and compassion for everybody around her. So just a huge congratulations to you, too, and thank you for your years of friendship. I also want to thank John Port and the AMPC. I know that you've done an amazing job, and congratulations on a great meeting. I'm going to start with just a disclosure that I do receive grants and royalties and other support from Siemens and Microsoft, and nothing that I'm going to talk about has got regulatory approval today. And I wanted to start with that because given the title and the session today, I'm going to try to show you how some technology that's emerging in our world is really going to disrupt our society at a professional level, but also our society at home. And I'm going to start with just my little story, my little angle on it. In the middle, talk about how it affects our ISMRM and related societies, and then end with life at home. And I want to apologize, there's a million things that I could have talked about today, things like cinematic rendering, but I did just choose this little thing. I hope that you can find a lot of other types of abstracts and visualization here today. So my little angle starts with rethinking the way we deal with information and coming and just looking at the speed at which this change is happening. I grew up where this was the kind of the way that we found information, was a card catalog and a library. But nowadays we all have Google, which seems like it's been around forever. It's only been 21 years. And now we have this thing in our pocket, and we're essentially carrying around all of human knowledge with us. And this has only been 10 or 11 years, and yet it seems like it's been there forever. And so technology is coming so fast. What's the world going to look like in 2050? So I started with this challenge around construction of a new building So our university is working with Cleveland Clinic to construct a new health education campus where all of our doctors, nurses, physician assistant, and dentists are going to be trained. And they told me in 2013 that they asked me to be part of a team that was going to work on figuring out a way to teach anatomy completely digitally. They said, this building is not going to have a cadaver lab in it. And when I started this process, 2019 seemed a long time ago, or a long time in the future, but geez, it's like 5 weeks from now that we move into this thing. But luckily the building is constructed and we're starting to do it. But again, this building is going to have no cadaver lab. And if you think about it, that's kind of scary because cadaver-based dissection predates what we call medicine today. And so we had 5 years to change many hundred years of history. But I think we can all in this room understand that the time is probably right. We know anatomy a whole lot better than we did many hundreds of years ago. We have amazing imaging technology. But there's pieces of it that are missing. So we started off looking at touchscreen tables that show anatomy. And this is great, but the human body is three-dimensional. And when you work on a system like this, it's good for radiologists and those who can look at radiological images, but for most people, it lacks the true 3D understanding. And for structures like the brain, I can tell you, you can look at this 3D picture and put together some sort of image in your mind as to what the white matter fibers look like, but in no way does this really work on a large scale, and students just really can't understand the full three-dimensional nature of the body. So we were a little bit stuck, but then I was actually on the floor at RSNA and I got a phone call. So it originated because Toby Cosgrove, the president of Cleveland Clinic, had talked to Craig Mundy, who was the head of Microsoft Research at the time. They called our president and dean, and who called me, and they said, hey, I need you on a plane to Redmond. I need you to go see Microsoft. And this was in 2014, and if you think back about 5 years ago, Microsoft was kind of a dying, boring company is what it seemed like. And I thought for sure that when I was going to get on that plane, this was the kind of thing that I was going to go see. But in reality, what I saw was this thing, which is called a Microsoft HoloLens. And it's probably the most revolutionary piece of hardware technology that I had seen since I saw an MRI the first time in the 80s. So what this is a completely self-contained computer that you wear on your head, and it projects holograms onto your retina that you then see as objects in the real world. So this is a schematic example, but this guy's got a weather monitor on his counter and what looks like a big screen TV on the wall, but all of those are just being projected into his eyes, and he can interact with these like they're real, really there. So my first introduction of this was I went to Microsoft and they put it on my head and they snapped their fingers and they took me to this unbelievable place. I'll describe in a minute. But I saw it in December, and about 4 or 5 months later, Jeff Dirk got to see it. So Jeff is a member of the ISMRM that you may know. He was at the Dean of Engineering at that time. And his job was to go out and find and investigate new technology. And I had probably talked to him 2 or 3 times a week for those whole 4, 5, 6 months in between me seeing it and Jeff seeing it. And he thought he understood what he was getting into. This is the email, though, that I got the day after he saw it, and it's my favorite email ever, and I thought I would show it to you. He says, last night I literally could not sleep. I kept saying that stuff is real, not videos, mock-ups, etc. It's real. My sense of when the future will happen has changed. Timeline has to be recalibrated. Blown away, truly. I maybe got an hour's sleep. So this is the kind of technology that, or the impact that this technology had on Jeff. And unfortunately, I don't have 4,000 devices to put on everybody's head. So I'm going to try to do the best that I can for the rest of this presentation to represent to you what Jeff saw when he went into that demo. So mine looked like this. My first experience was putting this on my head and looking around and seeing that I was on Mars. And I could see the rover behind me. And they said this was software that was made by JPL, and that you would never make a decision to drive a rover around on Mars by yourself. You're always going to have somebody else there. So they said, here's John. my colleague, he came in, and then he started teaching me about what it was like on Mars. He said, come look at this rock over here. I walked across the surface of Mars, and I was in class with John on Mars. And so I can say this is really different than the classroom that we had traditionally been in. Now I was on Mars. So we took the inspiration from this, and over the last 4 years, built up a software suite that looks like this, so that we have an anatomical model in the middle and groups of students that walk around and learn their anatomy, almost like they're in a museum. So this technology broadly is called mixed reality, and what this does is allows us 3 kinds of new interactions. So one interaction is between a person and digital information. It's a completely new way of looking at those 3D pieces of data. But more importantly to me, it's also a relationship between people, so person to person, and also places. So we can interact with the room as if it's a computer. And there are lots of companies doing this right now. So Microsoft has released version 2. There's also Magic Leap, which is funded out of Silicon Valley. And new startups like Nreal, which we saw this year in January, which have now these super lightweight 85-gram headsets. So these are going to be coming at an unbelievable pace. So our program has now launched holoanatomy. This is sitting out at several partner schools. And I thought I would just run through what a class looks like now. So this is 32 students taking anatomy class for a grade this semester. You can see they're walking around bodies that are there, right? So this is in progress, and we're going to try to show you what this looks like in a minute. But I thought I would show you, we're all scientists, and we're not going to do this unless we have information. So we did a trial in MSK with 64 students. Some of the students learned the upper limb, like the arm, in the cadaver lab, and then they switched to the HoloLens lab. We had another group that did it the opposite order. And then, so for the cadaver lab in the arm, HoloLens in the leg, and in the opposite order. Then we had another group that didn't see cadaver, or didn't see HoloLens at all. And then we tested them all on the same day. So this is what those classes look like when you can actually see the holograms. And the results are very positive. So the average score was the same between the 2 groups. There was a significant correlation between whether you learned in the HoloLens or learned in the cadaver lab. But the best part for us was the time. So we recorded every second that somebody was in HoloLens, and also took attendance in the cadaver lab, and you can see it was about half the time in the HoloLens group as compared to the cadaver. When we look at how much time they spent out of the lab in the cadaver group, we had them keep notebooks, and they didn't all turn them in, but that averaged around 11 hours. So I'm happy at the factor 2 improvement in speed. If we're talking about a factor of 4 or 5, it's even more impressive. Just to make it clear, our students are taking other courses to get kind of tactile feedback at the end of this, using the fact that HoloLens is that much faster. So with that, we're going to try a quick demo, and we're going to try to have Pia give you an idea of what this looks like. I have not really done this in front of 4,000 people, but we're going to try it. So what we're going to do is just get Pia in here to a HoloLens. We've got a couple of these devices, and I'm going to thank Dominique Franson and Andrew Dupuis, who are 2 of our students. And I'm going to give you a view from my lens of what this looks like. So Pia, do you see something in front of us here?
Yes, I see a sagittal view of a skull, like so, anatomic.
So can you come point maybe at his nose? Right, so we can learn anatomy this way, but the best part is actually to go inside. So can you stick your head inside? Let's go look at his heart. Pia, go, stick your head inside here. Pia hasn't done this before.
Or inside, oh, chill.
So we can come around and look at the valves.
Yeah, that's true. That's in blue. This is cool. It's very interesting, I could tell you.
All right, so we have a limited amount of time, but Pia, can you go look at his back really fast? Just go look at his back.
Pull it back?
Yeah, no, go look at his backside. Look at the spine. What would you do?
The spine?
Or go look at his left arm.
I don't. Oh, you mean well? What I see here in front of me is the brain and the.
Yeah. Can you go look at his left arm though? There we go. Oh. All right. You went around. Yeah, you're looking at the screen.
Yeah, but I.
All right.
Well, you see, I was not a good person for this. But
You're a great person. Okay, we unfortunately have to move on. So.
But it was so cool.
Thank you, Pia. So I'm going to have to go really fast through the rest, but thank you, Pia, and thanks to Andrew and Dominique for helping out with that too. I want to go through and just look at some of the ways that this is being used across the society. So these are slides from Bruce Daniel, and he gave me these a few weeks ago. And the thought that he left with me was that medicine isn't exact science. Sometimes we do too little, sometimes we do too much, and it's hard to do the right thing. And the example he gave was surgery. So this is a patient with cancer in the breast, and what we do is typically put two markers in, one on either side of the tumor. But what we don't know is what the shape of the tumor is, or what the surgeon doesn't know when they're going in, is really what the shape is. It looked like this, or maybe even a hook, or much larger. So when they went into this particular patient, they had tight margins, and what they ended up doing was a mastectomy, but it showed absolutely no residual tumor. And this is common in our world. So sometimes we're doing too little. A huge fraction of people going into surgeries have to go back for residual, or for surgeries to get rid of residual tumor, and sometimes we do too much. The average, the median volume of excised breast tissue is 2.3 times the optimal volume. So could we use this technology to improve that? This links in directly into things in our lab, like fingerprinting, where we're trying to do absolute quantification on the identification of tumors. In this case, it's a breast tumor. So could we, for example, provide a radiologist or a surgeon to look like this? So this is a capture of that brain tumor where each of the different subcomponents are colored. So could we then overlay that onto the subject so that we get the right excision at time of tumor? Groups out of, there's many, but out of this one from Fadi and Kassara at Rotterdam is one of my favorites, showing that they got a few millimeter accuracy between maps acquired previously and the tumor in vivo in the operating room. And this is, again, using the very first version of this hardware. This is only going to get better. Nicole Wake from NYU has also been a leader in this, looking at comparisons between the holographic rendering and 3D printing. She's just done amazing work showing that this is really helping surgeons when they go into the OR. Again, the group at Stanford is starting to look at the alignment between needles and the holographic representation of that inside the body so that they can guide things to the correct location, and then aligning 3D scans of the current breast position and the previous MRs, for example, to provide surgeons that direct link into the shape of the tumor. Christoph Leutze is also using this to look at placement of transcranial magnetic stimulation devices. So in this case, they're tracking the location of the TMS paddle and the underlying resting state networks that paddle would excite. So hopefully this can guide therapy for depression and other related diseases. These are slides from Reza Nezafat's group looking at the heart. So in this case, they're displaying the late gadolinium-enhanced scar images up against an EP-related result here. Again, hoping to drive better understanding of the 3D structure of the body in the operating room. Back at CASE, again, this is Dominique and Andrew's project. We're doing a combination of real-time acquisition, real-time reconstruction, and then development of an intuitive display system. So this is an example of what that looks like. So this is Dominique running the scan, and in real time, in about 100 milliseconds latency, she can see a hologram representing the actual heartbeat of that patient. So when you combine this with interventional MR, we're hoping to develop completely new therapies around this. But at the end of this, I want to just talk about the implications for society here. So in some ways, this is all just data. So it's data from the scanner to the recon computer. It's data from the recon computer to the HoloLens. So we have an internet, so we can make the distances between those much, much bigger. When we add in something like a robotic surgery assistant, like the Da Vinci system from Intuitive Surgical, again, this is just data going between those different locations. So if we took an imaging system and combined that with something like an intuitive system, Da Vinci robot, what's the distance that we can have between the surgeon and the patient? We're starting to use and think about these things. So this is a tool that we developed for working on our anatomy program. So this is one of our urology consults, John, who was in California working with Lisa, one of our biomedical artists. You can see that he's pointing at the data and just working on it. So my question for you is, are they working together? And if the answer to that is yes, you can say, are they together? It's a different question, but I can tell you they certainly felt like they were together. So you can say, well, that was an avatar head. I don't really like that, Mark. I need something a little more. So Microsoft and others are building studios that look like this, which can capture the whole 3D volume of the person at 1 millimeter resolution, 120 frames per second. And I'm just going to play you a video. I know we're running behind, and I'll be fast, I promise. That shows kind of where we are now, and I want to say this is a 3-year-old video. So just quickly going to go through this.
We're going to show you an exciting new technology that could fundamentally change the way that people will communicate in the future. Imagine being able to virtually teleport from one space to another in real time. Hey, Sergio, how does it feel like to be holoported?
It feels great to be holoported.
So Sergio is to wear his HoloLens device, and I'm going to wear mine. We can see each other in full 3D in real time. We can interact and communicate as if we're co-present. Sergio, can you walk around my space? Can you walk behind this chair? So we're doing everything to give the impression that Sergio and I are present in the same space. Sergio, let's just do a high five. That's great. Thank you, Sergio. We call this technology holoportation.
So essentially, this is $1 million computer in the back of a camera setup, but in a few years, this is going to be around $2,000 for the camera and a few $1,000s more for the computer.
My daughter is stood in a similar capture rig somewhere else in our lab. And she's going to holoport into my space, and I'm going to interact with her wearing my HoloLens.
Hi, Bob, I miss you.
Hey, Lilia, I miss you too.
When are you coming home?
I'm coming home very soon. Let me get out of your way. Hey, Lilia, you can only hear me, you can't see me, but what are these toys?
I have toys to show you. This one is named as Elmo.
Elmo?
And he can sing.
He can sing, wow. And what about the other one?
The other one is called Tina, and I like it because it has different stuff.
Well, that's so cool.
So you can tell that you can start to lose track of who's in the room and who's not. So I'm going to fast forward just a little bit.
Now, in that example, we were demonstrating live 3D capture. But our system is capable of another thing. We can actually record and play back that entire session. Now, this is almost like reversing through time. And if I wear my HoloLens device, it's almost like walking into a living memory that I can see through another pair of eyes from all these different perspectives. And because this is 3D content, we can miniaturize it onto this coffee table and experience it in a more convenient manner. And this becomes a magical way of experiencing these live captured memories.
So if you're walking around with this on your head, now you've got a memory of this up on your mantle. So I'll ask again, were they together? So you could say maybe, well, wait, they can't touch each other, but again, it's data just between your eyes and your brain. Well, it's also just data between your hand and your brain too. So we can work with people like Dustin Tyler, who's part of our functional electrostimulation group with amputees, and he's been giving these people touch on the end of their prosthetics. 1 minute, I promise. And so now we can combine this with a HoloLens, and we can take his prosthetic hand and we can put it in a different room. So now he can have touch, the sensation of touch, on a robotic arm that's a different room. So again, it's just data. So I want to ask you, so now I can see things and I can feel things, and the speed of light is pretty fast. How far away on the planet can I go and still be there? I just want to do a quick thing about privacy. We've got collecting data about all of this. I want to talk about who can own that wall and who owns your nervous system. Anybody who's picking up one of these devices, I want you to think about privacy before you do anything. And with that, I just want to say thank you to a lot of people. They're going to change our world. Where were you going to be in that world? So I want to thank John, Andrew, Dominique, the group. We have faculty positions open if you want to come visit, and this whole group of people who gave me slides. Thank you very much, and thank you for understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Griswold, for a fantastic presentation. And it is now my pleasure to invite our last speaker, Professor Hedy Ritschak. She is the chair of the Department of Radiology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and is an expert on cancer imaging. As past president of the RSNA, among other leadership roles, Professor Ritschak has thought deeply about potential disruptions to the field of radiology, and she will be telling us about disruptors to the way we interpret data. Please.
Thank you very much. When Dan asked me, I'm sorry, I have called since early this morning. When Dan asked me to deliver the keynote lecture, of course, I was very honored. But when he said, how about if you talk about AI, workflow, and value, it was way out of my comfort zone. And he said, that's good. So it is good because luckily I have a number of friends and colleagues that I bounced my idea off, and I'm deeply grateful to all of them for making this lecture hopefully to your liking. So I am, disclosure, I serve on the IBA Board of Directors. Disruptions in medicine are truly for better tomorrow. As Clayton Christensen said, as we're looking at the next revolution, it's going to be molecular medicine, imaging technology, and universally available connectivity. Disruptions are not new to medicine. Disruptions in cancer medicine really started way in 1953 when DNA was decoding. It was called in medicine by MIT the first revolution, molecular and cellular biology. It took 50 years for the second revolution, which was genomics, and change oncology forever. But then suddenly, it was only 10 years to the third revolution when MIT announced that the key to our success is convergence of life science, physical science, and engineering. And it was the birth or the beginning of precision medicine. And then things start moving very fast. The fourth revolution, inserts from the Davos economic forums, was really all about AI and big data and opportunities to use technology to enhance performance and augment human activity. And then suddenly we realize that AI and big data are wonderful, but humans and cognitive ability are extremely important. And convergence of human artificial intelligence at the intersection of human ingenuity and integrated intelligent technology are going to be with us to stay for at least next 5 to 10 years. So where are we today? Are we at the stage of Ultron and pure artificial intelligence? No, we are not. We all remember tremendous tragedy with Boeing 737 when pilots were struggling for more than 5 minutes to overcome the MCAS. Couldn't, the plane crashed. So therefore, as we're looking forward for the next 10 years, we really have to embrace and understand a converging paradigm of human, AI, and robotic process automation. What does it mean for radiology? We're going to address 4 areas: image interpretation, workflow, comprehensive imaging, and integrated diagnostics. Now, AI for triage of negative study. A lot of hype, a lot of excitement. As a patient enters, we're going to have images and other clinical informations, AI classifiers, and then if the confidence level is great, we're going to be able to triage those out. And if the computer isn't sure, we'll relook at the images. I would like to say all negative studies will be triaged out not so fast. There are a number of issues that we have to overcome. So not so fast, and issues to be considered. Who is responsible when things go wrong? The guidelines will likely vary by country. In the US, verification will be required because there are a number of regulatory hurdles to consider. Lessons learned from automated cytology. Algorithm has to be class 3 FDA approved. The process change must be accepted by regulatory medical boards. And then there is a strict QA process. It took pathology over 7 years after the system was developed to really have it widely employed. But there is another element that we all have to think about: training future generations. The most fundamental skill that we in radiology have is to distinguish normal from abnormal. Our paradigm in education has to change if indeed the normal studies will be triaged out. The flow, the workflow, we cannot wait for AI help. Streamline, accelerate, personalize, and standardize, but standardize the quality. Is it going to be from the moment of registration to MR protocol that's really guided or geared to a specific patient? Streamline MR imaging. Are there going to be biosensors or something else? Remain to be seen. Post-processing, radiology review and interpretation, where immediately voice activated, we need to see all the measurements, longitudinal changes in the tumor, and all other factors such as tumor volume. And then a radiologist is going to serve as a consultant. Is it going to be a hologram, virtual reality, in-person, telemedicine? But we are going to give a consultation on the results and their meaning. We heard about horizons in MR image acquisitions. The tremendous strength of MRI is its information rich. And it's a single modality that can really give us comprehensive tumor evaluations. But there are shortcomings. We have a tendency of adding sequences. It's not only a large data set, long interpretation, but having patient in mind. Patients, when they're in a magnet, usually don't feel well. And the last thing you want is to keep them there forever. But there is a comprehensive MR imaging on the horizon. This is just an example from NYU on radial imaging. Many other groups are contributing. The other example on the flexible imaging from MSKCC. The developments are rapid, but let us promise ourselves when they are implemented, it's not going to be addition, it's going to be replacement. And there's another thing that is so much needed, and that is comprehensive imaging with AI, merging modality and sensors. Example from NYU, where there is no longer just a dream, it is a reality in their lab. And if we can do that, we are really moving our ability as imagers to a next level. I want to show you an example of multimodality image analysis vision from lecture in 1995. Whole body biological imaging, the prediction was circa 2020, probably will be there 2020, but the idea is not new. It's our ability to implement that is absolutely spectacular. Another one of AI that we love in our daily work, and those are our dashboards. But we have to remember, dashboards are aggregated, user-friendly information display. Don't stand and say dashboards are integrated diagnostics. They are not integrated diagnostics. They are data aggregation, user-friendly, and hopefully soon voice-activated. The perfect example at present on integrated diagnostics is actually a human analog. It is what we do at the multidisciplinary tumor board, at the end of the board, but it has many limitations. Much information is unstructured, data are not quantified, not computable, and most of all, they are really not evidence-based. They depend on the experience of the members of the tumor board. And individual experience is variable, not scalable, and unfortunately, tumor boards are not widely available. So we do need to move from a human analog to AI. AI integrated diagnostics, nobody has it, nobody. The number one element on integrated diagnostics are measurement domains. All those measurements need to be standardized and need to be quantitative. And that includes both pathology, radiology, and clinical information. And you know we don't have it. Only when we are able to deliver on measurement domains are we going to move to integrated diagnostics. It has to be computer algorithm, computable data, connected databases, population-based outcomes, and data analysis algorithms. Integrated diagnostics are going to give us unimaginable, true predictive and prognostic biomarkers, and only then are we going to have precision oncology, being able to really assign patients to surgery, image-guided intervention, radiation therapy, radioimmunotherapy, which is really coming along, or medical oncology, and then the loop will be closed. This is something we all need to work together. So who says elephants can't dance? But we have to remember that the way to create value, somebody, he or she, has to take responsibility for translating those pieces into value. And modify from Michael Jordan, talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships. So respecting each other, working as a team, is the way to our future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Rizek, for a fantastic presentation. So let us now thank all three speakers for sharing with us the fascinating aspects on disruptors in our world of MRI. Also, thanks to Dan for your initiative to organize this inspiring session, and thanks to the audience for attending. By this, we will conclude our plenary session. Thank you.